Russia's military has been ordered to pull out of the Ukrainian city of Kherson, the only regional capital captured since the invasion began in February. The Kremlin's General Sergei Surovikin says the city is now impossible to defend and that troops will withdraw across the Dnipro River to safety. Russia captured the Kherson region back in March, and Vladimir Putin annexed it just a few weeks ago, vowing it would be forever Russian. Well, for all this, let's speak to Arise chief correspondent John Cookson, who is monitoring developments from London. Good to see you, John. So Russia announcing it's withdrawing its troops from the key city of Kherson in Ukraine. How significant is this?
Hi, Charles. Major story developing tonight out of Ukraine. And that news tonight that Russian forces are crossing back across the Dnipro River to the east bank, leaving Kherson city to the Ukrainians, which is symbolically absolutely huge and a major upset to the Kremlin. It all came about almost casually in a conversation that Surovikin was having on state TV this afternoon with the defense minister. And they were just chatting away about the situation in Kherson. And they said, well, wouldn't it be rational to pull out because we can't defend it anymore? It was such a casual conversation. And it was summed up as a gesture of goodwill, Charles. Which is just quite extraordinary. Of course, it is a rational decision by the Russians to save the lives of their own soldiers who were pretty much trapped in Kherson city with this counteroffensive that you say began in August by the Ukrainians. And now they're digging in on the east bank of the Dnipro River. Look, it is a major story. And the Russians haven't given up Kherson. Let's make that absolutely clear. I don't know whether the director can find a map of the area so we can talk about it a little bit more. But Kherson city is, as you can see, on the north of the Dnipro River. Now that map is very much out of date now because the pink region north of the river was occupied by the Russians, and including Kherson city. That's now changed completely. The Russians are now south by that map of the Dnipro River. So a major development, and the Russians digging in, as I say, to defend Kherson. There were reports that it might be a trap for the Ukrainians, but look, the Ukrainians are well aware of that. And I think this has probably been planned for some time, Charles, because when we talked on Monday, I suggested there would be a major development today, Wednesday, involving Kherson, and so it's happened. Now, if your humble correspondent, me, knows about it, then through social media sources, then for sure the upper echelons in the Kremlin knew about it well in advance. So a major development, and we'll have to see how this all works out. I suspect, Charles, that there are some back channels chatter going on. We've already talked about this week with Biden's national security advisor saying that he's been talking to Russian officials. Are we working, I'm wondering, up to some kind of negotiated ceasefire for this terrible war? Pure speculation, but it's a speculation that we can consider tonight as this story develops.
Well, quite, John. And you mentioned this being quite an embarrassment for Moscow, because we're talking about the main prize that Russia has managed to achieve since the start of the invasion in February, and now it's gone. But you also mentioned the fact that the meeting was televised. How much does that show how open Russia has now been forced to be about this war?
I think this TV event was obviously, I think, staged. It was the casualness of the conversation. The tapes will become available to international media shortly, probably to tonight. But watching it on Twitter and other social media sources, it was just it was interesting to watch, Charles, the way that these two men casually discussed withdrawing from Kherson City, knowing, of course, this was a major setback for the Russians to lose this strategically important city, the gateway to the Crimea, or one of the gateways at least. And it was a way, presumably, of letting the Russian people know, or selling them the story that the Russians, well, they don't really care about losing Kherson City. It's no big deal. It was a rational decision. I'm just wondering if that was the reason why it was televised in such a casual way this afternoon.
Yes, and just very quickly, before we move on to another story, John, we understand that people in Kyiv are closely following the results of the midterms in the US, obviously because America is by far the biggest funder for Ukraine's military fight against Russia.
Yes, it is important because with the Republicans in charge of the House, and frankly, the Biden administration hobbled now for the next 2 years in terms of getting major legislation through. I think Ukraine is going to find that the money won't dry up. America's committed already to $16 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. But certainly under the Republicans, the money won't be as fast flowing or free flowing as it was before, because they take a different view to the situation. As I say, $16 billion already committed, but whether there'll be any more out of America in the next couple of years, we'll have to wait and see. The Europeans are a different kettle of fish. They had pledged 16 billion euros earlier this week, and Zelensky praised the EU for doing that. But frankly, Ukraine needs billions, even trillions now to win this war and rebuild its country.
Okay, stay with us, John, because I want to get your assessment of this next story. In France, President Emmanuel Macron has officially ended his nation's 8-year anti-jihadist operation in the Sahel. Operation Barkhane has been inoperative since February, when France announced its military withdrawal from Mali. The last French troops left their base in the Malian town of Gao in August. While France has not ruled out further operations in Africa, future missions may be more limited in scope, according to Mr. Macron.
Our interventions must be more limited in time and from the outset. We do not intend to remain involved in external operations without any time limit. That is also why I decided, in consultation with our partners, to formalize today the end of the Barkhane operation.
Emmanuel Macron, and our chief correspondent John Cookson is still with me. What's gone wrong with the French in the Sahel, John? Because, I mean, governments in that region seem to be turning away from the French and more towards the Russians and the Wagner group who are there now.
That's certainly the case in Mali, Charles. You're absolutely right. The French went in 2013 when the north of Mali was invaded by jihadists, and there was a bitter fighting and conflict in that region. Then 2020, there was a military coup, and the generals asked the French basically to leave. We don't want your imperialist presence in Mali anymore because you're ineffective, and we prefer Putin's mercenaries to deal with the jihadists, and that's what happened. So this again is a practical decision by Macron to pull out of Mali. He talked about Sahel as a whole as having a lighter, a more integrated deployment of French troops in the region. At one point, there were 5,500 French troops there. They've lost 58 soldiers since they started policing the Sahel. They will stay in Burkina Faso, Chad, and Niger. So it's not as if the French are pulling out altogether, but it is a major shift. And as you say, the African nations of the Sahel seem to be leaning in a different way, and they see it as French imperialism. They see French forces as being largely ineffective, and they reached out to Russia instead. So it is a trend, I'm sure, that will continue. Macron planning a major conference with Britain and Germany in early 2023 to work out a new defense strategy, but it won't be focused on Africa, Charles. It will be more towards developments through Russia, and also the big beast in the East, China, and how to tackle the growing military threat that the West sees that China poses.
So the end of the French army as an expeditionary force, and they now look closer to home. John, thank you so much. John Cookson, Arise Chief Correspondent, talking to me there from London.